There are stories that never make the news. Not because no one cares, but because they have no ending. In the town where I live, a quiet suburb south of Tampa, Florida, people don't talk about that case anymore. Not everyone remembers it, and those who do only recall it in vague, half-true whispers. I wasn't part of it. No family ties, no friendships. I was just someone who happened to witness part of it. Or, more accurately, witnessed the moment when the truth began to surface. Back then, I was working as a field assistant for a group of college students. The day we found the car buried in the swamp was just another normal day. The sky was bright. Bugs buzzed in the heat. We argued over mismatched coordinates on satellite maps. Then, one of them noticed a pale yellow mass in a photo taken in 1997. At first, they thought it was an old boat, but I don't know why. I couldn't stop staring at it. Maybe because when I was a kid, my mother once told me a story about a girl named Anna and her husband who vanished right after their wedding. Also in this area. Also in a yellow Mustang. I thought she was making it up, but she wasn't. And that's where it all began. I still remember the day they pulled the yellow Mustang out of the swamp south of Florida. It was a hot morning. I was assisting a group of senior students from the University of South Florida on a project about landscape change. I wasn't a student, just a part-time tech aide, but I liked these kinds of trips. Fewer people, more trees, and silence. While the group was reviewing satellite images from the 90s, a student named Jacob noticed something strange. A faint yellow shape beneath dark water in a 1997 satellite photo. I remember he said quietly, "This looks like a car." At first we thought it was an old fishing boat or metal junk, but after adjusting the contrast and zooming in, it became unmistakable. A vehicle, slightly tilted, sunken in thick swamp mud. Police were contacted. 3 days later, they brought in helicopters, divers, and recovery teams to pull it up. I stood outside the taped-off area. The yellow of the car had faded into algae green, water dripping from underneath, windows smeared with sediment and weeds. But the license plate was still readable, FRD 1985. The first person to arrive was Rachel Evans. According to police records, she was the mother of Anna Evans, the young woman who disappeared in 1985, part of a case that had never been solved. I only knew the bare bones of it. Anna and her newlywed husband, Michael Whitman, left their wedding in that Mustang and were never seen again. People called it a voluntary disappearance, but Rachel never believed that. I saw her freeze in place, hands steady but eyes wide, as if time had rewound itself. Shortly after, the Whitman family showed up. George Whitman stepped out of his luxury car with that commanding posture like he owned the place. When he saw the Mustang, he didn't hesitate. "Yes, that's the car I bought for Michael. I had that plate made special." I heard it clearly. Everyone around us did. A police officer, maybe the lead detective, opened the only evidence bag recovered from the car, a silver lighter. No blood, no bodies, no documents, just that one item. George then reached into his pocket and pulled out an identical one. "I've got mine. The other's Michael's. We bought them at a Miami shop back in '84. I didn't know what Rachel felt in that moment. She said nothing. The rest of the Whitmans stayed quiet. The wife remained stoic. The younger son Daniel stood behind them, eyes cast down. But George, after identifying the lighter, started speaking louder, as if giving a statement to the press. "If they weren't in the car, where are they? Nobody just dumps their wedding car into a swamp. This has to be investigated. Maybe someone from her side did this." I knew exactly what he meant. So did Rachel. She stepped forward, her voice low but steady. "If my daughter wanted your money, she would have stayed. She wouldn't have disappeared with your son." George's stare hardened. Rachel stared back. The tension between them was thick enough to slice. Then the lead officer stepped in. "This isn't a missing persons case anymore. It's a criminal investigation. Someone covered this up in 1985. The crowd stirred. Local reporters had arrived, but I doubted they understood how deep this story went. I looked at the car, looked at the people, and I knew. Someone had been lying for 12 years, maybe more than one. I went home that evening with a feeling I couldn't shake. Not because of the car, but because of Rachel's eyes. The eyes of a mother who'd finally found a piece of the answer, yet knew the truth was still far out of reach. I heard that Rachel returned to the Whitman residence just one day after the yellow Mustang was pulled from the swamp. In her hands was an old cardboard box, carefully taped. Neighbors said she hadn't called in advance. She simply stood at the gate, rang the bell, and waited. The person who answered was Daniel, Michael's younger brother. Unlike his father, Daniel didn't have the air of someone hiding something. They said he opened the gate without hesitation, invited her inside, and led her upstairs to Michael's old room. There, Rachel set the box down. Inside were a few dress shirts, some technical books, a wristwatch, an empty bottle of cologne, and several old cassette tapes, all belongings of Michael that she had once found in her daughter's bedroom. For 12 years, she hadn't touched them, but that morning, after returning from the swamp site, she opened the closet and started packing. Daniel thanked her for keeping everything, but before Rachel could leave, he stopped her. "I just found a few things in Michael's closet, too," he said. "There's one strange box. You should see it." They opened the closet, moved aside some old shoes and a golf bag. Behind them, pressed against the wall, was a dark purple velvet box, about the size of 2 cupped hands. The lid snapped shut with a clasp, and when opened, the interior was lined with white silk. Inside was a black lace lingerie set, the expensive kind. Still had the price tag on it, $198.50. No one said anything for a few seconds. On the lid was a small white card written in deep blue ink. "For you, Otis." Rachel repeated the name, Otis. She had never heard Anna mention anyone by that name. Daniel shook his head too. Among all of Michael's friends and acquaintances, there was no one named Otis. I heard this from someone I know at the police department. They said Rachel brought the box in for evidence that same afternoon. The police took it immediately and sealed it in a bag. An officer named Martinez handled the evidence. He carefully inspected the tags and discovered that the set had been purchased from a luxury boutique in Coral Gables, the kind of place that might still have customer records going back to the 80s. A few questions arose immediately. If Otis was someone Anna knew, why was the gift in Michael's room? If Otis was someone Michael knew, why would it say "for you"? And if Michael had discovered the gift, why did he keep it, instead of getting angry? Or was it Michael himself who hid it, and from whom? I don't know, but I do know one thing. The name Otis, appearing for the first time in more than a decade, began to drag other things up from the mud that someone thought had been buried forever. I didn't know what happened after the box was submitted to the police. Not until a week later, when the first pieces of news began to leak out. It wasn't from any major paper, just a small headline on a local news site: "Police investigate new evidence linked to 1985 disappearance." I read that line over and over again, feeling how empty and cold it was, the kind of detachment the law often uses to talk about private tragedies. Then someone I knew from inside, where Officer Martinez worked, told me they had tracked down a purchase record. Eloise Boutique in Coral Gables, the store that sold the lingerie, had preserved their customer logs since 1985, and in the April entries there was a name: Otis Granville. Otis. At last, he was no longer a shadow. According to old files, Otis had lived in Fort Lauderdale in the early 80s. He worked part-time as a waiter, with a minor record for disturbing the peace. Nothing remarkable. No one paid attention. But what caught the detective's interest the most, I was told, was this. He had once worked as a driver for a transport company, a company owned by George Whitman. A chill ran straight down my spine when I heard that. Of all possibilities, the man George insisted he didn't know had once worked right under his nose. The police began tracking old addresses. A rental house in Hialeah had long been demolished. A P.O. box hadn't been used in decades. But then, a stroke of luck, Otis had once been arrested for driving without a license in 1990. In his temporary custody form, he listed an emergency contact, not a relative, but his direct supervisor at the old company, Ray Delane. That name wasn't unfamiliar. I had heard it back at the swamp site. Ray was George Whitman's longtime personal driver, a man who always wore a white shirt and black tie, walked with a straight back, and kept his gaze low. Back then, I thought he was just a quiet employee. Now, I wasn't so sure. The police called Ray in for questioning. According to what I heard, the interview was conducted behind closed doors. Ray denied having had any contact with Otis in years, said he hadn't seen the man since the company let him go, but there was something he didn't know. The day Rachel left the Whitman residence, someone had seen Ray talking to a strange man at the gate. That man wore a gold chain with letter pendants, and the first two letters, according to the witness, were O and S. No one said it aloud, but I knew the police were watching him, and one day they followed Ray's car, not George's but Ray's own vehicle, as he drove to an old warehouse behind the industrial zone in Homestead. The door wasn't locked. Inside was pitch black. A beat-up car sat against the wall, and in the dark corner behind it was Otis. He didn't run, didn't resist. When they arrested him, the first thing he said was, "Whitman made me do it. I didn't have a choice." Otis didn't stay silent for long. According to what the police later shared, he began talking just 2 hours into the interrogation. No lawyer, no bargaining. Perhaps he knew. This time, there was no one left to shield him. No Ray, no George Whitman. The first confession was recorded, lasting nearly 2.5 hours. Parts were redacted from the official transcript, as they involved names still holding influence. But the part I heard, the most crucial one, was about that night. The night of June 12, 1985. The last night Anna Evans and Michael Whitman were ever seen. Otis said Ray called him exactly 1 week before the wedding. His voice was calm, but the instructions were clear. "We need a psychological blow. Make Michael believe that girl Anna isn't clean anymore." They had been planning for some time. George didn't want Michael to marry Anna, a working-class girl, raised by a single mother in a rental home in West Tampa. To him, she was a stain on the family name. Ray gave Otis the address of the beach cottage the couple had rented for their honeymoon, a secluded place near Dania Beach. Otis arrived at 9 p.m. Anna was alone. Michael had gone out for a walk on the beach. Otis knocked, claiming he was delivering a gift from the family. Anna opened the door. He handed her the velvet box. Inside were the black lace lingerie and the card, "For you, Otis." That name wasn't real. It was a fake one, Ray told him to use. Could have been an old boyfriend's name. Could have meant nothing. Just bait to spark suspicion. Anna opened the box, frowned. Otis said her voice wasn't angry, just confused. She asked, "Who are you?" and started to close the door. That was when Otis forced his way in. What happened next, he said, happened quickly. No screaming, no witnesses. When Michael returned, the door was still ajar, and in the darkness he saw Otis pulling a bedsheet over Anna's body. She was no longer moving. Michael lunged at Otis. But Ray stepped out from the shadows and struck Michael on the head with a metal rod. They hadn't meant to kill Michael. The original plan was for him to find evidence of betrayal and leave Anna. But now, with a dead body and a witness, they had no choice but to clean it all. Otis said Ray's voice didn't tremble. He simply said, "We need to wipe everything. By this time tomorrow, no one can know they were ever here." That night, they carried the bodies out back, wrapped in blankets, loaded into a pickup truck. They drove through the night to the Everglades. Ray had already picked a spot. Deep water, still currents, no foot traffic. They laid the bodies on a limestone ledge, then sent the Mustang rolling straight into the swamp. Otis said he could hear the bubbling for a long time. Then silence. The beach house was scrubbed clean the next morning. Sheets replaced, furniture reset. When the owner arrived that afternoon to check on the place, everything looked untouched. Just, no one had checked out, and so it was that eerie normalcy which hid a double murder for 12 years. When I heard that confession, through a summarized, unofficial copy, it sent a chill through my body. Not because of the blood, but because of the planning. The way a wealthy family could push aside a murder like it was just a mess to be wiped clean. And because during all those years, Rachel lived with a silent grief while George kept his tie straight, giving speeches at charity galas. Otis is now in custody. But I've heard George hasn't said a word. And the biggest question, who gave the order to kill, still hangs in the air unanswered. I don't know why George Whitman remained silent. Maybe he believed he would walk free like he always had, or maybe silence was the last thing he still had control over. Whatever the reason, in the days following Otis's arrest, he no longer looked like the man he used to be. As a kid, I used to see George as untouchable, a model businessman, chairman of the city council, the biggest donor to the regional hospital. He was everywhere, at the new library opening, at police officers' funerals, on plaques reading, "With gratitude to the Whitman family" across town. But once the name Otis surfaced, everything began to shift. For the first time, George was denied a speaking slot at a regional business summit. A week later, someone spray-painted his mansion gate with the word "Killer" in red. And soon, the major news outlets caught on. Daniel didn't say anything publicly, but I heard from someone at the law office, where he once interned, that he went to see Chief Ray, alone, voluntarily, without his family's lawyer. They said he brought a canvas folder, old, thick, tied with crisscrossed string. Inside were Michael's journals, handwritten letters, notes, even a photocopy of the honeymoon rental contract from Dania Beach in 1985, a copy Daniel had secretly taken from his father's safe. The police already had evidence that Otis and Ray had once worked for George. But no one had dared ask the bigger question. Did George give the order? Did someone explicitly say to Ray, "Make them disappear"? That's what Daniel cracked open. He told them, according to what I was told, that throughout childhood, Michael had been under their father's control. What he studied, who he dated, who he could marry, all had to fit the Whitman name. When Michael fell in love with Anna, George was furious. He cut off tuition money, revoked access to the family car, even threatened to disown him. Michael pushed back by marrying her, and a week after the wedding, he vanished. Among the letters Daniel found, there was one from Michael that read, "If you're reading this, it means Dad has done something. I know he's capable of it. He won't risk the Whitman name over a son who dared to love the wrong girl." I don't know how the police reacted after reading that letter, but I know George felt something breaking. For the first time, I saw him show up at the station without a lawyer, no tie, no watch, just an old man with sunken eyes and shoulders that, once proud, now slumped forward. And Daniel. I saw him leave the precinct at dusk. He didn't speak to the press, but when he passed the gate still marked with red paint, he paused, stared at it, then took off his coat, tossed it into the back seat of his car, and kept walking. I think that was the moment he chose his side. I used to believe George Whitman was the sole force behind everything, but then something began to bother me. A small detail that seemed unimportant at first, yet the more I thought about it, the more it didn't sit right. Why would Ray Delane, a chauffeur, a hired man, willingly kill for his employer? Even loyalty has limits. Even money has a ceiling. But Otis said Ray didn't flinch. Ray was the one giving clear orders, the calmest man that night, the one who chose the location, the method of disposal, and how to erase all traces. I began to believe Ray wasn't just executing orders. He had his own reasons. Then one day I heard an old story. It wasn't in any police report, not in any newspaper, just a quiet memory shared by a retired nurse who had once worked in the special care ward at Whitman Memorial Hospital in the 1970s. She said that in 1973, a wealthy woman had come in to give birth. It was an out-of-wedlock pregnancy, no father listed on the papers. But for 3 nights straight, a man in a gray shirt waited outside her hospital room. Not a husband, not family. His name was Ray Delane. According to the nurse, right after the woman gave birth, her family came and took her back to New York. The man never returned. But he had left behind a handwritten letter, which the nurse secretly read. It said only one line: "Even if you never say it, I know that child is mine, and I will always stay nearby, waiting for your sign." That woman, according to hospital records, was Vivian Whitman, George's mother. If that story was true, if George grew up never knowing that the chauffeur at his side was his biological father, then suddenly, everything flipped. Ray didn't follow orders. Ray acted for family, for honor, for the woman he once loved, the one who chose silence in the arranged marriage to protect the Whitman name. And if that's the case, then George wasn't the puppet master. He was the child being overprotected in a twisted and brutal way. I believe George felt it too. After Daniel confronted him in a closed-door meeting at the police station, they said George sat alone for 3 hours in the interview room, saying nothing, just holding an old photograph, a young Vivian, staring at it. When the officer finally asked, "Do you know who your real father was?" he simply shook his head, then said one thing: "I don't know who I am." In a town where name and lineage had always meant everything, that may have been the saddest confession of all. I don't know exactly when the entire town came to know the full truth. Not everyone read the reports. Not everyone had the patience to follow each twist in a case that had stretched on for nearly 20 years. But it spread anyway, not through the media, but through the voices of people who lived near one another. The bakery owner heard it from her daughter at City Hall. The librarian shared it with her morning reading group. From the elderly to the school kids, people began to piece it together. The deaths, the deception, the reputation, the buried bloodline. Things they thought only happened on TV were now tied to someone they'd once shaken hands with at a fundraiser. George Whitman was not charged with murder. There wasn't enough evidence. Ray died in a holding 2 weeks after his arrest. Official cause: suicide. Otis is still awaiting trial, but no one seemed to care about that anymore. Because the most terrifying thing wasn't what they did. It was how many years we lived beside them, not knowing we were part of a manufactured dream. Rachel no longer lives in her old house. She moved away right after the final hearing. Some say she went to New Jersey, near a distant niece. I'm not sure if that's true. I just know that on the morning she left, I saw her standing in front of the small house where Anna grew up, where the wind chime she once made by hand still hung from the window. She didn't cry, just looked, then turned away, taking an entire lifetime with her. Daniel stayed. But now, people don't call him George Whitman's son anymore. They just say Daniel. And I think that's what he wanted most. Not to stand out, just to start over as someone new, untethered. He doesn't speak much. He accepted a position as legal advisor for a nonprofit, and the first thing they did was reopen the files on 17 unsolved disappearances from the 1980s. Someone asked me, if the truth came out, why does this town still feel just as heavy? I think it's because some truths don't set you free. They just wake you up. And once you're awake, you have to choose to keep living as before or step outside the dream. Eventually, everything settled down, the way all storms must return to the sea. No more police cars, no more news vans, no more crowds outside the Whitman estate or lurking near the station. The streets in town became familiar again. The old bookstore opened at 9 sharp, the cafe owner still brewed strong, and the kids kept playing basketball behind the elementary school every Saturday afternoon. Only I couldn't see things the same anymore. Not because I knew too much, but because I had seen too clearly how truth gets buried, layer by layer, beneath politeness, beneath money, beneath power, beneath the silence of those who thought staying quiet was the best they could do. I wasn't connected to anyone in the story. I wasn't related to Rachel, wasn't friends with Daniel, and certainly had no reason to care about the Whitman family. I just happened to be nearby when the truth began to break open, and then I couldn't look away. I used to think I was an outsider. Now I know there are no true outsiders. Everyone is part of this town, part of how it operates, in its good and in its wrongs. I'm not telling this story to judge who was right or wrong. not to teach anyone how to live. I just wanted to preserve it, like a memory that needs to be kept. Because if no one tells it, it'll get buried again, like that yellow car in the swamp all those years ago. And if one day someone asks me, "Do you think justice was ever done?" I'll say, "No, but at least now we're no longer pretending we didn't know." For me, that's enough.